It's another Manly Monday and another tough Manly Monday. Why is it so hard to talk about the abuse of men? And this has been so hard. This is like my seventh attempt at this video. I try to get into these things relatively fast. Sometimes there's so much preamble just to cover my own ass. It's impossible. And you can tell I'm pretty frustrated by it because there's the human element of this whole thing that is so very real. And of course, this is come from the closing arguments of the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial and the discussions I've been having in one-on-one Leanna care sessions, men and women alike, just very frustrated and recalling their own trauma based on what's been going on here. So if you like this sort of content, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/LeannaK. The trial overall has been ugly. Because it's a battle fought in a court of law, but the verdict is going to be court of public opinion. And so there were times you would have sworn this was, that Johnny Depp was on trial on sexual abuse charges, not this is a defamation case about an op-ed that Amber Heard, put her name on in the Washington Post. It came out she didn't really write it. She was involved in the crafting of it, but she didn't actually write it. I don't know how somebody puts their name on something they didn't write, but that's just my personal bias, right? But there was some really ugly, really stigmatizing language all the way through this trial. And they're litigators, right? They're not advocates. They're not public policy workers. They're not people like me who do peer counseling. But man, I found myself getting shaky at times. And so I can only imagine how people out there are feeling. And I'm hearing from a lot of men and women alike the frustration, but also a hesitation to talk about their own traumatic experiences because, they the thing that I think gets a lot of people about the Johnny Depp Amber Heard thing is that one of them, at least, is lying through their teeth. There's no way there's just a misunderstanding in this one. Someone is just lying and someone has been using the system to abuse the other. And some people can argue, oh, it's just a really dysfunctional relationship and they're doing it to each other. But either she completely defamed him and accused him of a whole bunch of things that weren't true, then tried to be cute about it, or, he keeps suing her as an ongoing pattern of abuse, right? Both cannot be true. Somebody's lying here. And you could argue that, oh, she was so mealy-mouthed about the Washington Post op-ed that, oh, she didn't technically lie, which is basically what her legal team started off arguing. But the general consensus was it was about him. I remember at the time the sort of the proverbial gasps that went out. It is just disingenuous to suggest that people didn't know who she was talking about there. And people were inclined to believe her. Why? Because she was a younger woman. He was an older, more wealthy man. The assumption is that he had more power because he's bigger, stronger, wealthier, so on and so forth. And, those are reasonable assumptions. Sometimes reasonable assumptions can be wrong. But those assumptions have a history in a world that, first of all, doesn't apply to major celebrities because they both make millions right? I mean, it's very hard to feel sympathy for her. Oh, her part was cut back in Aquaman 2. She got a $2 million payday. Who cares if she's in the movie for 15 minutes or, you know, 2 hours? I wouldn't care. It's $2 million. 15 minutes of work? Thanks. Okay. You know, great. It's hard to sympathize with people who live in that sort of rarefied air. And so I want to be clear before I talk about anything else here, no matter what happens with that verdict. That doesn't mean what happened to you was not real. That doesn't mean the trauma you experienced was not real. It was real. Okay? Johnny Depp Amber Heard about Johnny Depp Amber Heard, no matter what her lawyers say about the First Amendment or women's rights or abuse survivors and no, it's about those two and who's telling the truth and who's lying. The fact that they even said that really pissed me off as somebody who has to listen, who has to hear the fallout, the pain that statements like that cause. No, what happens between two individuals is about those two individuals, and individuals matter. Causes are supposed to support individuals, not the other way around. Ultimately, all of these human rights, all of these equality pushes should be everybody's right to be an individual, to be their best selves and determine for themselves what that best self is and how to get there, right? That's the goal. Let's not lose sight of the goal. Because this is really important when you get into the whole idea of a perfect victim and there being no such thing as a perfect victim or like central casting victim, right? In the sad truth, the hard truth that we have to start from, right, about why it's so difficult to talk about the abuse of men is the minute the victim is a man, they're not a perfect victim. Doesn't fit the stereotype, right? And I hate that stereotype. You guys know I don't like the idea of women being default victims. I think that ultimately holds us back because I hate pity. And there were times when I was younger in my career where there were shoots and I was told I couldn't go because it was too dangerous, because I was the only woman involved. So I was denied work opportunities because it's too dangerous strictly because of my gender. And I remember saying at the time, if it's too dangerous for me to go, and this was in Los Angeles, okay? If it's too dangerous for me to go, maybe none of you should be going. But of course, it was the implied suggestion that, if it's dangerous, it's going to be especially dangerous for a woman. Why? No logical reason there. It was the assumption, men just go crazy around women and can't control themselves and women are victims. And you can tell I'm still angry about it to this day because it just felt so unfair. Muscles don't help if somebody pulls a gun on you, right? It's such a stupid, dated paradigm. Makes me nuts, but people fall into it without thinking about it. And so the minute a man's abused by a woman, and women are just as capable of coercive control as men are because it's predominantly psychological, right? But then you get that emasculating quality about it that makes it even harder to talk about because, male victim, less perfect victim. Male victim, woman abuser, even less perfect victim, right? Burden of proof goes up and up and up and up. And that's not right. But that's life. We live in a shitty world in some ways still. There has been so much in the media about abuse now that people who want to commit reputational abuse know how to structure a manipulation so that it looks like an episode of Law and Order Special Victims Unit, right? And that's what a lot of people are responding to, the Justice for Johnny Depp stands are responding to, that, her side of it just seems so perfect, right? It seems so checks every box. And the argument is, well, it's too perfect. It's a constructed argument. And then, of course, when they start pointing out things like she claims she thinks he broke her nose and she's on James Gordon a day or two later. Oh, how much evidence do you need? Like, that's literally the closing argument that her lawyers made. Oh, if there are pictures, she faked them. If there aren't pictures, why aren't there pictures? Just nothing's good enough. And I'm somebody who had to support men who were abused, and got Paul Bettany'd. The point I was like, oh my God, scrape me off the wall, was when Amber Heard's lawyers called Paul Bettany Johnny Depp's drug buddy. It was a completely unnecessary defamation of a third party. Like, there's a charge to the term drug buddy. No, they're friends. They don't just get together to do drugs. But that's an abuse tactic that people do to try to turn the target of their abuse into a pariah. It was bald face out there. Paul Bettany didn't ask to be involved in this. That was just a cheap shot. That I can say with certainty because it was right there. They did it in front of cameras. And, I have been in that situation where I stuck with a guy who was abused. And so the abuser just goes after the reputations of anybody who won't abandon the guy. But then I've also been somebody who reported workplace abuse, gendered workplace abuse, sexualized workplace abuse, and was not believed. Was basically told I was a troublemaker. And of course, it happened in a hallway where there was supposed to be, in one case, it happened in a hallway there was supposed to be security cameras, but of course they weren't real cameras. They were a dummy camera because the station was cheap. And so, there's no proof. Didn't intervene at all. Not stay away from her. Nothing. Just, the union's gonna this. And there's a story in Canadian media right now that's hitting me really hard because it just sounds so damn familiar. They do it to men. They do it to women. It's clearly still a crappy place to work. Big Canadian media. But this is the thing, because abuse has become so sensationalized. True systemic abusers know how to manipulate stereotypes, know how to manipulate expectations. And this is all genders, right? They know what to say to make the abused party look like the abuser. And so when men are abused because of the way the, central casting narrative goes, that's just easier to do. And I say this as somebody who was done to me. Oh no, she's crazy. She's freaking out. Well, yeah, I was freaking out because I was being physically assaulted and had to just go back in and be at the mercy of this asshole again, right? Yeah, I freaked out. Anybody would. I was very young at the time. It was not a good time. And I mean, that's one of the sickeningly captivating things about the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. Everything that her side claims is proof that she abused him. He abused her. His side turns around and claims, no, it's proof she's abusing him because, she's abusing him through the lie. But then also she admitted to punching him at least once. And no matter what happens now, the central casting narrative about domestic abuse has fallen apart because, like it or not, the system still demands a perfect, weepy female victim who never retaliates. And, after previously denying she ever hit him, yeah, she hit him in retaliation. She hit him to defend her sister. She hit him this, she hit him that. Somebody's lying. This gets layered onto the fact that in terms of socialization, a lot of socialization of men is inherently abusive in that toughen up kind of way. And so it becomes much more difficult to be able to spot the signs of abuse, right? Because, well, name calling. Well, some people name call each other in jest, right? The only difference between fun trash talk and abusive language is if it bothers someone, if it's having, a psychological effect on someone. And a lot of men, a lot of women too. I was always given the don't let them know it bothers you advice. And I realized that's terrible advice because, the only way to know the difference between somebody just not knowing something's bothering you and someone abusing you is if you ask them to stop and they don't. That is the only surefire way to tell, right? Because everybody has bad days. Everybody has days where they're just overwhelmed and they do bad stuff and they throw things and they smash bottles. And okay, maybe not everybody's done that. Everybody's probably had the urge at some point. I know in entertainment it's widespread. And the difference between somebody who does it once because they've had a really bad period and someone who does it as a habit to bully people, it's the pattern, right? It's the pattern that makes the difference. The thing about entertainment is that it is very vulnerable. If you haven't done the job, you don't recognize how raw you end up feeling, especially on big productions where the days are really long and it goes on for a while. You end up very raw because even if you're playing a comedic character like Captain Jack Sparrow, that's a lot of being aware of movement. That's a lot of keeping your voice consistent. It's wear and tear on the body. It's wear and tear mentally. It's wear and tear emotionally because it's more than life. It's pump it out, take after take after take. And if you've got problems at home on top of that, yeah, you lose it. Your nerves are just raw. So were his outbursts at people proof he's an abuser or proof he's being abused? Because one of the big warning signs that somebody's being abused is behavior changes. And this is the thing that I think a lot of people feel a lot of sympathy for him is you hear about people saying, oh, yeah, he always used to wreck stuff. He never used to wreck people. And he was also a very generous, kind, gentle person at his core, despite his penchant for trashing hotel rooms. And then all of a sudden, he's this rage hound. And her side claims that's proof he's a violent abuser. The argument could be there where that personality change is an indication he's being abused, as is a relapse of an abuse of drugs and alcohol. That is a major, major, major thing. And the problem is that when someone does have a substance abuse problem, there's this understanding in social services, and it's there for a reason, but it's the idea that addicts lie. They lie to score fixes. They lie to hide their addiction. It's part of it. Um, and that's true. But just because they're lying about their addiction doesn't mean they're lying about everything else. And the fact that that is stigma that's applied across the board um, means that addicts don't get interventions when they need it. We had an employee back in the day that had a very serious health crisis and was in intense pain. And because they were a recovering addict, the hospital wasn't taking them seriously. When they went in for treatment, they happened to be another ginger. And when I showed up and they assumed I was family, all of a sudden they started treating this person like a human being. I have seen it firsthand. It disgusted me. I will never forget it. And not the same, but similarly, when men are abused, first of all, it's very difficult to get them to talk about it. I find in one-on-one sessions, I have to open up about some of my own experiences so they don't feel emasculated talking about theirs. And there's a lot of yes, no, did this happen? Did this happen? Did this happen? Did it feel like this? Was this the experience? To get especially men to open up, because it is so shameful. It's shameful for anyone who's abused. But because of those double standards we have regarding what being a man is supposed to mean and what being a woman is supposed to mean. But also how emotions are processed and how different types of people express different types of emotions. It's especially hard to create that trust and overcome the vulnerability in a male victim of abuse. They don't want anybody to know they're being abused. It's too shameful. And because I've felt that shame myself, I understand it. I also understand that it was easier for me in some ways because I read as female. I don't think typically female, but I read as female. And the problem I got into was because my emotional processing, the way I react to things is more typically male than typically female. It's like, oh, you're angry. I was treated like not the right kind of victim because instead of being, oh, help me, I got angry. I got angry and I was trying to reclaim my dignity that way. And I tell you, a lot of the thoughts I had seemed a lot like those text messages to Paul Bettany that people are using as proof of abuse. Those text messages were things I've had to caution friends of mine about, like, do not send this to other people. You don't know where they're going to end up. And I hate having to do that. But the guy's already been so abused. I don't want any more ammunition that his abuser could possibly use against him, because something that is normal and a part of the process to pull yourself out of that pit of shame. It's a cover of anger over the pit of shame. And the only way through is through that cover of anger. And yeah, you get angry and you say a whole bunch of things that emotionally you mean, literally you do not mean. I would like to, or it's just talking. It's just talking. But if somebody is using false accusations against you, that's ammunition for them. And if they ever, get a chance to subpoena your phone records, or if they happen to have hacked your phone, or you're talking to somebody you think you can trust but you really can't, that happens far more often than you might think, by the way, if you've got shared friends. But all that's used as proof of abuse but it's actually part of the abuser's campaign of terror against the guy she won't let go. Now, why does this happen? What's in it for them? Well, my experience, it's control. It's there is this sort of twisted element of what it means to be a proper woman. And this is all stereotyping again. But proper women are desired by men. Proper women make men not want to control themselves. And so there's this weird, like, metastasized bodice ripper fantasy going on about, oh, he was so jealous. He was so jealous. He flew into a rage because I talked to this other guy and this, this big story and all that. And yet real women, ideal women in this same messed up, fractured fairy tale are never rejected, because the man falls in love with them and then they're together forever, and the rejection is not something an ego in that person, the ego of that kind of person can handle. And so they perpetuate the relationship through allegations. And, how dare you ignore me is essentially it. And they will insist they just want to be left alone. They feel so unsafe. They just want to be left alone. And yet they're the one suggesting they meet. And men do it because they're emasculated and they're shamed, and it affects their thinking. Men become over apologetic. They have this conditioning that when she says jump, they say how high, which means they go. This was something that I admit I was a real asshole to the first couple guys I saw do this, and I regret it deeply. I didn't know at the time, right? I could not understand why all these false accusations were being made, and they just kept going back for more. Now I understand it's a marker of an abused man. That all the self-defense mechanisms, all the rational enlightened self-interest goes out the window. The hooks are so in, the self-concept has been so destroyed that it's like a self-punishment cycle. They feel so much shame that they go back for another round of abuse because part of them thinks they deserve it or something. And then you get into the self-destructive behaviors, alcohol, drugs, cigarettes, all that stuff. It's just a depression, eating their feelings, so pain, sickness, sleeping all the time. We're not good at recognizing these signs, because even though what's going on inside is essentially, with layers, essentially the same in victims of abuse of all genders, the way it's expressed, the way it's processed, and the way society gives permission for certain things is very different. And then, you get into LGBTQ plus circles, and there's these extra levels of complexity, right? A trans person, for instance, may have far fewer family and friend connections because they were rejected when they transitioned, or they're mid-transition and so they're not comfortable socializing or something. There are a lot of different reasons. Back in the day, there were abuse issues in LGBTQ plus communities because people would get kicked out of their homes. And so they'd be financially vulnerable and they'd end up in abusive relationships as a way to keep a roof over their head, so on and so forth, right? There are all these factors that make this whole thing incredibly complicated. And various special interest groups have created this seductively reductive narrative. That rhymed. Seductively reductive. We like it because we know exactly what to say. Believe women, great. Well, why isn't it believe victims? Believe women, great. Why isn't it believe victims? You know, Kevin Spacey was charged with like 4 counts of sexual assault in the UK while this is going on, but believe women, no, believe victims. The problem with the Johnny Depp Amber Heard thing is who's the fucking victim here? That's, I think, what makes it so captivating. That's what makes it so painful. That's what makes it so frustrating. And that's why people just sort of revert to their corners. And again, that trauma is welling up in people. They go on the internet and say snarky things, you know, like Amber Turd, which admit, not nice, pretty funny. But then they get accused of being part of the cycle of abuse, or being a bot, or being a troll, or being somebody who has no judgment because oh, he's a celebrity. And it's re-traumatizing, 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 re-traumatizing. People need to heal. And the only way to do that is find someone. What one friend of mine recently, one of the friends I supported, and I supported him imperfectly. I know that there are certain things. Everyone can be more compassionate in those circumstances, but there's sometimes I just wish I handled things differently. But I didn't know the extent of what was going on at the time. But he said to me, you know, you're one of the few people in the world I feel completely safe with. And you can see I'm getting emotional. That meant a lot to me because I know what this guy's been through. And it's heavy for him to say he feels safe at all based on what he went through. And then I feel like a jerk because of all the times I wasn't there, it's a complicated thing, but at least there's that. And that can only really work when it's not open to the court of public opinion, right? It isn't about hashtags, and it isn't about who has the better lawyer, who has the better PR team, who is useful for, cyber warfare propaganda in some foreign actor who just wants to undermine, stuff like feminism, Western feminism. It can only happen in those one-on-one connections or small group connections, right? And it is about that person feeling safe again. That's what abuse takes away. And we've lost sight of that. We've lost sight of the fact that that's what it's really about, that feeling of safety, that feeling that, in certain places, the construct of femininity, the construct of masculinity, so on and so forth, that has no place in this healing. This is an individual reaching out to and leaning on another individual. And that is it. That's the way healing happens. So we need to talk about this even though it's hard. And we need to really talk about why it's hard. And I'm very interested in your comments to this. Again, try not to go too big picture social stuff, because there's a time and a place for that, but people are really raw right now. So that's just me asking, not telling. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it, who can't afford it, so they can talk about stuff like this. Coffee.com/Leanna K. Thanks for watching, and thanks for supporting the men in your life.